Welcome to the Inner Athlete Podcast, where we help young athletes, parents, and coaches build strong, resilient, and high-performing athletes for sport and life. I'm Trent and head strength conditioning coach and founder of Inner Athlete. Each episode, we break down the training, mindset, and habits that actually matter, from strength and speed development to injury prevention, confidence, and long-term athletic growth. Whether you're a parent trying to support your child or an athlete chasing their potential, you're in the right place. Let's get into today's episode.
And I think one of the almost like one of the most harmful things for kids and parents is to taste like success early, and to actually and then to get told that you're talented, and then you can kind of chase that, and you want to hold that like status as a kid, I guess, but also parents can fall and prey to that too, and it ends up being like a vicarious thing where they're almost they can become attached to saying, oh, my kid's a star, which is kind of gross, and so in the book there is like a self kind of reflection to ask some kind of questions, just to like recalibrate, what am I doing and why again? Just in terms of just to keep, bring it back to the original, reasons why they wanted their kids to actually, do sport. And so I think kids and parents really over-takes on the importance of early and junior competition results, where the data should show that they're relevant. I mean, being the best under 12 is not an indicator of like long-term potential, at like senior or pro level, until they've can get to their late teens. It isn't a relevant metric really, and so chasing competition performances at that age is to the detriment of their long-term potential and progress. The thing that parents need to know, and kids too, is that the biggest sign that you're on the right track is that you're making improvements, year on year on year on year, and that's it. So like what we can end up doing is like chasing the early success tests is we just create a plateau, which is the last thing we want, because they can get so far just by doing more, but as I said, that just gets them to their like ceiling quicker basically, and so long term that doesn't serve them. It's kind of similar to the idea of like the trade off of like explore versus exploit, and for juniors, it should be about exploration in terms of like trying different things, building a really broad base, and trying to kind of raise their ceiling and increase their potential long term, as opposed to trying to exploit what they have in terms of like short term performance. And that's most of the time that's where we're going wrong. And again, in terms of with my head of academy or head of national academy town, I don't care what happens at under 12. I mean, it isn't relevant. I mean, if they win a title, but it's nice, but it's isn't. I mean, that isn't a sign that they're going to make it. So I think we need to calm down and like stop chasing early success.
Yeah, no, I actually do agree with that. I think one of the things, because I work with like national level swimmers, like the 12, 13, 14-year-olds, the one thing they always talk about is like, oh, who they're racing against, do they make finals or anything like that? And it's like, well, how did your swim go? How was your preparation beforehand? You know, what did you do, you know, in between your swims, you know, between heats and finals? And it's like, oh, I did this well, this didn't go so well. So what do you think you could do differently next time? So actually understanding, you know, what are things that they can control specifically? And then, all right, you've identified this, speak to your coach. They might be able to identify a couple of tweaks we need to make in your training. This is the thing that I want you to focus on. So it's very, very like process heavy for the younger ages, because once, I guess when we talk about puberty, it kind of starts to solidify more of those movement patterns moving forward. So I think the biggest thing I've noticed is once they start going through I think you talk in the book about the peak height velocity pre, during, and post, how like the physiological changes start to occur. And some of the kid, and I think you mentioned with boys, they get almost like what we call like a free kick, like, you know, testosterone starts.
Absolutely, yeah. Free gains.
Yeah, testosterone increases, but with girls, it's a different story. It's almost like they get nerfed to some degree as well, because all these physiological changes that happens with the pelvic angle and the hormonal profile. So there starts to become a greater differentiation between boys and girls. And what I'm really saying is the needs pre-puberty are actually going to be a little bit different because of what's going to happen post-puberty.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you know, I spent a bunch of time on this in the book produced in and the journal in my work as well. I did some work with Swimming Canada to create a coaching module, you know, just purely on this topic of what young female swimmers need. And as you say, like boys, puberty is awesome. You get all these free gains in, you know, like lean mass, strength, power, speed, endurance even. Whereas girls get like none of that. So what we need to do if we want to keep like girls in sport, because otherwise everything just gets harder at the age where they're the most self-conscious. And if we want to keep them from thing like a performance plateau or breaking, then we need to like give girls what boys get for free with training. And so I've been banging the drum that with girls, we should be training them from ideally just prior to puberty onwards, which for girls, because that all happens like 2 years sooner as well. So it's kind of, in an ideal world, we'd be training girls from age 11 onwards, and into swimming, it's more key in terms of their lifelong bone health. But because we have this, you know, wings and toes basically lay down 90% of the bone that they're going to have. Basically, like by age, I think at 18, they have like 90% of the bone that they're going to have, right? And so this is our opportunity to lay down bone for swimmers, because it is a weight-bearing sport. We have to give them that stimulus through dry land training. Because if we don't, female swimmers have worse bone health metrics even than untrained girls do, because of the like volume of work that they're doing. It's kind of leaching bone almost, and they don't have the stimulus of like dry land weight bearing exercise. So
yeah, and then kind of more specifically, you talk about as the term biobanding. So did you want to just briefly describe what that actually means?
Absolutely.
Like what the implications of those three ranges are?
So I use it in the context of like physical preparation, and I use very broad bands as well. So the three bands are like, or the three phases, I guess, is like pre and PHB, which is like PHB is just the period of the most rapid change in height. So it's the adolescent growth spurt, and so that's our key marker to the age that happens basically. And so pre PHB is kind of a year prior to that essentially, and everything before. Mid is as it's like some months prior through that adolescent growth spurt period, which for boys can extend to like 2 years. And so we need to like track growth, because if they're still growing, then they're still in that phase essentially. So because it's kind of a 2-year band, but for boys it can be up to 3. And then everything is then the post band is they've essentially grown and grown into their body a little bit, and so in that post PHV band it's then about more focused on gains for boys anyway. So we would look to lift heavier loads, for instance, whereas in that pre band it's more about movement quality, so there is load, but it's less focused on how much they lift, but how well they lift, and having a regular dose of movement to calibrate to their changing bodies, because everything is obviously it has their limbs are changing length. They have to figure out the coordination and even body awareness, even spatial awareness piece. So having a consistent training regimen during that time helps them to have that body awareness and to be able to kind of constantly calibrate their changing limbs and changing bodies as well.
Yeah, and I think obviously starting that I guess that resistance training or neuromuscular training earlier on,
absolutely,
it just kind of almost helps speed up the process when they start going through these various periods of time as well.
Yeah, I mean, in that pre band, it's all about supporting motor learning, which load can help with, that having load in the right place can help to actually figure out where your body is and figure out posture and how to stack the segments. So yeah, it's all geared to movement quality and motor learning.
Yeah, and then I want to look at the opposite side of the coin is obviously the injuries associated with each of the phases as well.
Yeah,
obviously, with working with the junior girls soccer program, you see for under 13s, under 15s, under 17s, there's a bit of I guess a grouping of conditions that you tend to see. I'd just like to get your thoughts on that and kind of what are the key things that we tend to see specifically.
So it is those conditions tend to be the combination of the stresses of growth and then the stresses of support on top of that. And that essentially, and there's a couple of things happening there. So to that progression attends because we grow distal to proximal. So basically, that just means that growth takes at the extremities close sooner. So you attend to see foot and ankle concentrations, wrist concentrations around the same time. It then moves closer, so knees and elbows and necks, and then finally it tends to be hips. And there is a bit of to play with that though, because with soccer, for instance, football whatever, all of the football codes actually, you do see hit like different properties starting like pretty early. So they're kind of a, and again, it's because the growth plates is still open, and sometimes you're still growing, and sometimes you tend to kind of like grow in response to the load almost, which can lead to like permanent change to like, you know, things like cam and pincer different deformities that are then most pro football players have some kind of issue because of the volume of football they played at, you know, the age of like 8, 9, 10, 12. So the, you know, those closing of the growth plates is something that we need to keep an eye on in terms of like the overall volume, and that's again where we get things like the keeping weekly hours of organised sport to a limit of like below the Trajan years. You know, those types of general guides are like really relevant in those younger groups, kind of up to puberty, and then kind of a year beyond, perhaps even 2 years. Whereas after puberty in that like post PhD band, they can tolerate, you know, more volume, particularly if they have the training in the physical preparation.
Yeah, and then what I took out of the book is obviously with the you mentioned about the growth plates, but also with Severs and Osgood, we tend to see a lot.
Absolutely,
of that.
yeah.
It's massive,
yeah.
Especially for a lot of the field-based sports. It was quite interesting how they actually happen at different periods, but it kind of makes sense what you said before, where the distal, the parts of the body, so like your foot, your ankle, they tend to experience that sooner.
Sure.
And then later on down the track, it tends to be Osgood.
Yeah.
So I thought it was actually very interesting from that perspective.
Yeah, cause I mean, like so two different things that's happening there. Like the timing is again just due to when, like, because growth plates at the extremities close simultaneously, until like you tend to grow almost from the ends. The other thing is, as limbs grow, muscles adapt quickly, whereas tendon and like connective tissue structures tend to lag. And sometimes what you have, like all of the different things, sometimes osteosynthetase is at the tendon insertion, like it gets under, you know, chronic stress, and that's the trigger and the mechanism, because you have the stress of like basically, particularly everything's, you know, grown, so everything's become longer, so everything's on under greater tension all the time, and the tendon is supposed to adapt into tendon lengthening, whereas muscle adapts faster. So in terms of dryland training, you can do things to help that tendon adaptation to avoid these overuse conditions. It's in terms of the overuse conditions at the insertion, but also just in general with like tendinopathies as well, which are also common with kids that play a lot of sport as they're growing.
Yeah, and then obviously post high velocity, obviously now, especially with boys, as they get, you know, bigger and stronger, the tendency for soft tissue injuries actually starts to increase as they start to withstand more forces and higher intensities.
Yeah, which, I mean, you know, it kind of makes sense. I mean, if you have, you know, more horsepower, suddenly you know you're in a position to you can hurt yourself, particularly if you don't have the what comes with it. Because it is literally that they've just been souped up. So they're more powerful, they're stronger, they're faster, and that they have to figure out how to control it. And so that is kind of why you tend to see those more high octane, acute injuries as opposed to overuse conditions quite so much. In general, boys, as they hit adolescence, they need mobility training because they get really, really tight because they're growing and they don't really stretch. Whereas girls need the opposite. They tend to, mobility training is a good thing, whatever, but they don't need to stretch on end because almost they have too much flexibility for their strength as it is. So the bigger issue for girls is being able to control the range that they have. I mean, there are exceptions in the periods of really kind of rapid growth, and they can, mobility can be impaired. But in general, particularly with your swimmers, they're like noodles, right? I mean, they're they've got loads of range. They're just very kind of bendy, and their biggest need is to have the strength and the postural control to actually control the range they have. And the more range, the more control, and the more control and strength through range you need.
Yeah, that's why I love doing sub max isometrics with them. They absolutely hate
it. Yeah. And but putting them under load through range is a good one.
Yeah. Now I want to flick across to your Instagram because like I said before, I'll share it up on the screen so we get a bit more context. I really enjoy your posts, and I think you've only got just under 5,500 followers. I think you should have all parents, they're in this boat, so it should be a big market. There should be a lot of people following you specifically, but I think there's a couple of good posts, and I think the first one is we've kind of mentioned it before. Is you looked at we spoke about the long-term development. You kind of don't care where they were at under 12s when they come to you at 16, 17 years old. You're like, all right, where you are now, have you actually developed appropriately from, I guess, earlier on? And then what is your, I guess, your base that you've set yourself over the last, 16, 17 years, which has a better predictor of what your potential is likely to be in the next, 5 to 7 years. So just kind of just give a little bit of a snippet about kind of a bit more of the context and how you kind of, and also how do you kind of get your message across to parents, using your social media?
Yes, I think, in terms of this post, the big message here is that in terms of selection for junior teams, coaches and the selectors are largely just picking the kids that are big for our age. And the reason for that is to a point, it favors the kids that are born at the right time in the year in terms of the winter period, but more so the kids that are just further along in their growth and maturation, so the early maturers. And we have to give some thought to the fact that in an under 14, under 15 squad, in terms of their particularly for boys anyway, there's such a range in terms of their individual biological age. It can be 3 years different, and so we really aren't comparing the same thing because they're just at different points in their journey. And so two things, one is that the kids that are favored just because they're further along, they need to still be given the stimulus and the onus to develop, rather than just relying on the fact that they're just bigger than everyone else and just can physically dominate them, because that's only transient. That won't last very long.
If you're getting value from the Inner Athlete podcast, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a review. It helps more parents and young athletes find the right guidance and keeps this podcast growing. Back to the show. You have just listened to the Inner Athlete podcast. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with the release of weekly episodes. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to get great tips on all things youth athlete development and youth mentoring.